In the quiet town of Ridgewood, Ohio, life moved slowly. The kind of place where neighbors waved at one another, doors were left unlocked, and the local pharmacy doubled as a social hub where people caught up on news. Everyone in Ridgewood knew Dr. Martin Keller, the town's pharmacist. He was polite, always willing to lend a hand, and had become a trusted figure over his 30 years of service. He sponsored the local baseball team, donated to food drives, and even delivered prescriptions personally to elderly patients who couldn't make it to the store. But behind that pleasant smile and white coat, Keller hid a secret so dark it would eventually stun the entire nation. Between 2010 and 2019, Ridgewood quietly recorded an unusually high number of overdose deaths. On paper, they were dismissed as part of the wider opioid crisis ravaging America. Parents grieved, funerals were held, and people blamed pills, poverty, or the bad choices of a few unlucky souls. Nobody suspected that the heart of their tragedy was standing behind the pharmacy counter, every single day, wearing a gentle smile. The victims seemed unconnected at first. A high school teacher, a retired bus driver, a young single mother, a factory worker, a pastor. Their ages varied. Their lives were different, but one chilling fact tied them together. Every single one had filled their final prescription at Ridgewood Pharmacy. It was Detective Sarah Donnelly who noticed the pattern. She was young, sharp, and had joined the Ridgewood Police Department after years working in the State Narcotics Bureau. Her colleagues initially brushed her off when she raised concerns. "It's the opioid crisis, Sarah," they said. "Every county's drowning in it." But Donnelly wasn't convinced. She pulled toxicology reports from the past 5 years and saw something deeply unsettling. The fentanyl concentrations in Ridgewood's overdose victims were wildly inconsistent. Some were so high that the deaths didn't look accidental at all. They looked like deliberate poisonings. Still, what could connect so many different people to the same deadly substance? That's when she spotted it. Each one had been prescribed medication from Keller's pharmacy just weeks, sometimes days, before their death. At first, she wondered if someone inside the pharmacy was tampering with pills. Maybe a disgruntled employee, maybe a thief. But Keller had almost no staff turnover. His assistants were local kids who went off to college after a summer or two. The only constant was Keller himself. Digging deeper, Donnelly found something even more disturbing. Keller's pharmacy was not struggling like others in the state. While many small-town drugstores were closing due to chain competition, Keller's business thrived. Prescriptions poured in, patients trusted him completely, and his name carried weight. Yet despite his success, he lived simply. No flashy cars, no vacations, no mansion. His motive couldn't have been money. So what was driving him? The answer came in the form of a black leather journal, discovered during a quiet surveillance operation. Police obtained a warrant after Donnelly convinced a judge that Keller's prescription logs were suspicious. They raided a storage unit rented under his name. Inside, they found rows of neatly labeled boxes. Some contained outdated pill bottles. Some contained old pharmacy records. And in one, they found journals, more than a dozen of them. The entries were meticulous. Every victim was documented not as a person, but as an experiment. Keller wrote about how he altered dosages, how he substituted certain capsules, how he gradually increased fentanyl amounts until he achieved what he chillingly described as the perfect silence. He recorded their final conversations, their family structures, even the dates he expected them to collapse. He didn't see himself as a pharmacist anymore. He saw himself as an author, writing with lives instead of words. One entry read, "Patient number 47, female, mid-30s, requesting refill of oxycodone. 2 children, recently widowed, eyes weary, increased dosage by 60%. Prediction, collapse within 14 days. Will observe obituary column." 2 weeks later, the woman was dead. But the most disturbing discovery came from the hidden cameras. Keller had wired his consultation room with small pinhole cameras. On the tapes, investigators watched as patients sat across from him, explaining their pain, their worries, their lives. Keller listened kindly, nodding, scribbling on a pad, sometimes offering tissues when tears came. He was warm, empathetic, the very image of a community healer. Yet investigators knew, watching those tapes, that Keller already decided their fate. He smiled at them, reassured them, handed over the prescription bag that would end their lives, and watched them leave. When Keller was finally arrested in 2019, the town was in disbelief. Hundreds gathered outside the pharmacy, some crying, some furious, most unable to understand how the man who had delivered their grandparents' medicine could also be the monster who killed their friends and neighbors. In interrogation, Keller was calm. He didn't deny anything. When asked why, his replies sent shivers through the room. I didn't sell drugs. I wrote stories with lives. Each one was a narrative beginning and ending in my hands. You don't blame an author for finishing a book. The trial became national news. Families of victims filled the courtroom. Some broke down screaming when the journals were read aloud. Others sat in stunned silence as prosecutors played footage of Keller casually speaking with his victims, knowing their deaths were already scripted. Keller's defense attempted insanity, arguing that he suffered from delusions of authorship and control. But the jury didn't buy it. He was methodical, deliberate, and chillingly rational. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. Even behind bars, Keller never showed remorse. Reporters who managed to interview him described his eerie calm. One journalist asked if he regretted killing dozens of people. Keller smiled and answered, "Regret? No. Every story must end somewhere." Ridgewood has never recovered fully. The pharmacy was shut down, the building left vacant for years before being torn down. For the families, trust in small-town institutions was shattered forever. To them, the face of evil wasn't a stranger in the dark, but the friendly pharmacist who handed out death in a paper bag. Today, criminologists study Keller's case as one of the most disturbing examples of a medical professional turned serial killer. He didn't kill out of rage, profit, or impulse. He killed to feel like an author, scripting lives and deaths like chapters in a book. And the most chilling part? Experts believe the true number of his victims may never be known. For every overdose linked to his pharmacy, there may be others lost in the chaos of the opioid epidemic, their deaths written into Keller's silent library of stories. In the bustling city of Milwaukee, 2014, commuters often passed an aging apartment complex on the east side. To most, it looked unremarkable. Peeling paint, dim hallways, a building long past its glory. But inside apartment 3B, a nightmare had been unfolding for nearly a decade, hidden in plain sight. The tenant was Angela Morris, a quiet middle-aged woman who lived alone. Neighbors knew her as polite but reclusive. She worked nights at a laundromat, paid rent on time, and rarely invited anyone inside. Nothing about her screamed danger. But police would later discover that Angela's apartment was a graveyard, and she was its caretaker. It started in 2006. Angela's younger brother, Matthew, overdosed on heroin in her apartment. Instead of calling for help, Angela panicked. She couldn't afford to lose the apartment. It was rent-controlled and one of the last affordable places in the city. She feared that reporting a death inside might cause eviction. So she made a choice that would define her life. She sealed Matthew's body in a spare room, locking the door, and told anyone who asked that he had moved away. Months later, Matthew's friends stopped asking. Life went on. Angela kept paying rent. But the smell? Neighbors sometimes complained about a sour, chemical stench in the hallway. She brushed it off, claiming she had plumbing issues. Years passed, and then it happened again. A friend of hers, another addict, collapsed in her living room one night. Angela didn't call 911. She dragged the body into the same locked room. When it became too full, she began using the closet. By 2014, Angela's apartment contained 5 decomposing bodies. Some were relatives, some were acquaintances, all had died inside, and all had been hidden by her. Police later concluded she hadn't killed them directly, but she had let them die, refusing to call for help, refusing to acknowledge their humanity once they were gone. The truth came out in the most unlikely way. A maintenance worker entered the apartment to fix a leaking radiator while Angela was at work. He noticed the overwhelming odor stronger than anything he'd experienced before. When he followed it to the locked spare room, he pried it open and recoiled in horror. Inside were 3 human skeletons, partially mummified, sitting propped against the wall like discarded dolls. Black garbage bags lined the floor. The closet contained 2 more. The workers staggered out, vomiting before calling police. When Angela returned home that night, officers were waiting. She didn't resist. In fact, she seemed relieved. During questioning, Angela calmly explained, "I didn't want to lose the apartment. They didn't have anywhere else to go, so I kept them." Detectives pressed her on whether she'd killed them. Angela insisted she hadn't, that they had all died from overdoses or natural causes. Toxicology reports later confirmed most had indeed died from drugs or illness. But prosecutors argued that her refusal to call for medical help made her complicit in their deaths. Even more disturbing were her journals. Investigators found notebooks in which she described the dead as if they were still living with her. She wrote about cooking meals for all of us, about watching TV together, about speaking to Matthew late at night. One entry read, "Matt doesn't like the new neighbors. He says they're too noisy. I told him not to worry. They'll quiet down soon." Neighbors testified that Angela often spoke to herself in the hallways, carrying groceries and saying things like, "This is for the kids." Some thought she was eccentric. No one imagined she was addressing the dead. The trial was one of the most haunting in Milwaukee's history. Prosecutors labeled Angela the Keeper, a woman who chose secrecy over humanity. The defense painted her as mentally ill, traumatized, and unable to cope with loss. Families of the victims filled the courtroom. Some wept, some shouted in rage. One mother screamed at Angela, "You let my son rot in your closet like trash." In the end, Angela was convicted not of murder, but of multiple counts of negligent homicide, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison. To this day, criminologists debate her motives. Was Angela truly protecting her rent-controlled home? Or did she grow attached to the dead, preferring their silent company to the living? One thing is certain. For nearly a decade, apartment 3B was not a home. It was a tomb, and the city walked past it every day, never realizing what horrors lay behind its thin walls. Detroit, 1999. The city was in decline. Factories closing, neighborhoods crumbling, crime rates rising. Amid the chaos, a string of house fires broke out across the east side. At first, they seemed random, small, rundown homes engulfed in flames, often late at night. Residents chalked it up to bad wiring or squatters trying to keep warm. But detectives would later uncover something far darker. A serial arsonist who didn't just set fires. He set them with people still inside. The fires began in the winter of 1998. An abandoned duplex went up in flames. A week later, another blaze tore through a row home. By spring, 10 fires had scorched the east side, leaving families displaced and at least 4 people dead. Fire investigators noticed something unusual. Accelerant residue was found at nearly every site, often gasoline poured in odd, deliberate patterns. The media began to whisper about an arsonist. Neighbors, terrified, started calling the figure the Matchstick Man. Detective Carl Ramirez, a veteran with the Detroit Fire Investigation Unit, was one of the first to suspect the pattern wasn't random. He noticed that all the fires followed a strange geography, circling closer and closer toward a single neighborhood, as if the arsonist was working his way inward. Ramirez dug deeper and discovered something chilling. Every home that burned had once been insured by the same small agency, an independent office run by a man named Harold Stokes. Stokes was a failed real estate investor, nearly bankrupt, but his agency specialized in insuring old, crumbling homes most companies wouldn't touch. On paper, Stokes appeared legitimate, but Ramirez suspected otherwise. He subpoenaed insurance claims and found that Stokes had personally collected nearly $2 million in payouts over 2 years, payouts triggered by the very fires tearing through Detroit's east side. The scheme was simple, brutal, and horrifying. Stokes recruited vulnerable tenants, often the poor or elderly, convincing them to take out policies on their decaying homes. Weeks later, The houses would go up in flames. Sometimes the tenants survived. Sometimes they didn't. Stokes didn't care. He cashed in regardless. One survivor, a 72-year-old woman named Lorraine, recalled how she begged Stokes to help her after her house burned down. He visited her in the hospital, where she lay with third-degree burns. According to her testimony, Stokes patted her hand and whispered, "Don't worry, the fire already paid for itself." It wasn't until July 1999 that detectives finally caught a break. A man named Darnell Cooper, a petty criminal, was picked up for breaking into a hardware store. Hoping for a lighter sentence, he confessed something shocking. He had been working as a torch for Stokes, paid $500 per house to douse homes in gasoline and strike the match. But what truly horrified detectives was Cooper's admission that Stokes sometimes insisted people stay inside. He wanted the fires to look accidental, even tragic. A dead tenant, he explained, made the insurance payout look more legitimate. With Cooper's cooperation, detectives wired him for a sting. In a recorded conversation, Stokes was caught bragging. "People think fire is random, but fire is a business, my business. Every flame puts money in my pocket." Armed with this evidence, police raided Stokes' office. Inside, they found files detailing dozens of planned fires, complete with maps, payout schedules, and names of intended victims. Some homes hadn't burned yet, meaning Stokes had a list of future targets. The trial in 2000 was explosive. Survivors of the fires packed the courtroom, some with visible burn scars, others holding framed photos of relatives who hadn't escaped. Prosecutors laid out the scheme in damning detail. Over 3 years, Stokes had orchestrated at least 27 arsons, resulting in the deaths of 11 people. When shown photos of burned-out homes, Stokes remained expressionless. When asked if he felt remorse for the deaths, he said only, "Losses are part of business." The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before finding him guilty of multiple counts of arson, fraud, and felony murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. To this day, Detroit residents still remember the fear of those years, when the smell of smoke in the air meant you might wake up to your home engulfed. The case of Harold Stokes remains one of the most disturbing examples of greed taken to its most monstrous extreme. A man who turned human lives into fuel for profit, burning homes and people to ash in the name of money. Los Angeles, 1987. The city was booming with wealth, movies, and glittering promise. But beneath the glamour, something sinister was taking shape in the world of luxury art theft. It started with a series of high-end robberies. Mansions in Beverly Hills and Malibu were broken into with surgical precision. Security alarms were cut, safes cracked open, and priceless art pieces vanished without a trace. Detectives noticed a pattern. The stolen items weren't jewelry or cash. They were always paintings. And not just any paintings. Every stolen work depicted women. Portraits, nudes, mother and child scenes, even abstract canvases with feminine figures. Over the next 3 years, more than 30 homes were hit. Newspapers called the thief the collector. Detective Leonard Briggs, a veteran of the LAPD's Art Crimes Unit, became obsessed with the case. He studied blueprints, interviewed security experts, even consulted the FBI. But whoever the collector was, he never left fingerprints, never made mistakes. Until one night in 1990, when a Beverly Hills mansion fire revealed something horrifying. The fire department rushed to extinguish the blaze. Inside, amid smoke and water damage, investigators found a hidden basement, and within it, dozens of stolen paintings stacked against the walls. At the center of the room, under a spotlight, was a single portrait of a young brunette woman, painted in the 1940s. Pinned to the frame was a note in neat handwriting. She was the first. The rest are echoes. Detectives soon identified the homeowner, a man named Dr. Raymond Cole, a respected psychiatrist with an elite clientele. Cole was known for treating Hollywood actors, executives, and politicians. No one suspected him of being the mastermind behind one of the largest art theft sprees in Los Angeles history. But when they dug into his past, they uncovered a chilling story. In 1946, a painter named Helen Archer, a woman who had been Dr. Cole's first love, vanished under mysterious circumstances. Her last known work was a portrait of herself, which had never been found. Cole was a medical student at the time, and police never tied him to her disappearance. But friends of Helen had always whispered that Cole had been controlling, obsessed with preserving her image. Now, decades later, detectives realized the stolen art wasn't random. Each piece was a surrogate for Helen, a desperate attempt to recreate her through other artists' eyes. Cole wasn't stealing for money. He was curating a shrine to a woman lost half a century earlier. Inside his home, police also found reels of old therapy session tapes. On them, Cole spoke not to patients, but to Helen, as if she were in the room. In one tape, his trembling voice confessed, "I've kept them all for you. Every face, every frame, until you return." The trial in 1991 captivated the nation. Prosecutors charged Cole with dozens of counts of burglary, arson, and suspected murder in Helen's decades-old disappearance. Though Helen's body was never found, the circumstantial evidence painted a grim picture. Cole had likely killed her, then spent the rest of his life trying to resurrect her through stolen art. When given a chance to speak in court, Cole looked directly at the jury and whispered, "You don't understand. They weren't victims. They were stand-ins. I was keeping her alive." He was sentenced to life in prison. To this day, many of Helen Archer's original works remain missing. Some believe Cole destroyed them to keep her for himself. Others think they still exist, hidden in secret storage units scattered around Los Angeles. The legend of the collector continues to haunt the art world, a chilling reminder that obsession, when left unchecked, can become a prison of one's own making, and that behind the glamorous walls of Beverly Hills once lived a man who turned his heartbreak into one of the darkest crime sprees in Los Angeles history.